And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pumpkin Copter Cast, the only video game show. So today I'm joined by Corey King, who is here to say some words about this upcoming title, The Last Taxi.
Hi.
Hello. So let's start with this. How about you introduce yourself for the folks watching at home?
Sure, yeah. My name is Corey King. I'm the co-founder of ZenFri Inc. The other co-founder is also my partner. We have a kid together and we live together and everything. And the Zen is actually, we met online years ago, and my handle was Zenith and hers was Friday. So ZenFri is basically trying to amalgamate our names together, as it's basically the company's just the creative output that the two of us kind of lead. It's sort of developing more to a team-oriented thing than just being about us, but that's sort of how it started.
Okay. And what would you say was your favorite game and or games growing up?
Growing up, I think I had an unhealthy interest in Star Wars games, so I honestly missed a lot of the great titles. Like I have Mario Sunshine just now on the Switch, but I didn't have it when I had a GameCube because I bought the GameCube for Rogue Squadron.
Oh.
Um, and so I had way too many Star Wars games. But beyond like Star Wars, I think like Age of Empires was always huge. I loved Age of Empires a lot. Civilization, yeah, SimCity. Those kind of management games, which is really weird because I don't feel at all capable of making those kind of strategy management um, times four type of games. But those are definitely where a lot of my time went. And then like there is still the traditional like I didn't own Zelda, but like I would stay up late with my best friend who had Majora's Mask, trying to get the couple's mask and things like that. Those are some of my fond memories. But in terms of all-time favorite game from my childhood, it's probably Sonic 2.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. And what would you say is your favorite game and or games now?
I would say like my favorite game right now in terms of contemporary games is I think Breath of the Wild is
Mm-hmm.
probably one of my favorite games. I actually that's the as much as I said I played Zelda with my friends, I didn't ever really like Zelda. My partner D from ZenFri loves all the Zelda games, but never really got too far into Breath of the Wild. But for some reason, I loved Breath of the Wild. And Red Dead Redemption number one. I don't really like Red Dead 2 too much, but those are kind of my two kind of pillar games in terms of overall like influences and stuff. It's like my favorite overall series, even though it's not my favorite game. It's probably like Mass Effect is a series I really loved and played multiple times. And I still do like Civ and those games. The games I liked as a kid, I still like, but those other games are sort of the more newer games I play.
Okay. And, if the world wasn't currently trying to light itself on fire right now, and we were at like a convention like PAX or something similar, and, you at ZenFri had a booth and someone was
Mm-hmm.
just walking by and they saw, oh, the last taxi, what would be like the convention floor pitch you would give them?
Okay, so I mean, there's the quickest one is you are the last human taxi driver in the automated future. The hours are long, the pay is terrible. You must resist obsolescence. That's sort of one of the ones we go with, and then a different one is sort of like basically it's a action management we call it, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
job simulator style conversation game. So it's a game that's mostly about conversation, but you have all these activities that you do that are sort of frenetic. There's like a tractor beam that you use to hijack cargo from drones, and you got a toll booth you can hack to get money back, and there's sort of that kind of frenetic actiony gameplay mixed in with what's actually like a branching conversation game. Every single passenger has a branching conversation that affects your tips, affects outcomes, and ultimately affects like a very long story. So I guess the quickest thing is it's like Papers, Please meets Mass Effect with like job simulator-esque gameplay. It's kind of like the basics of it.
Okay. And, Like the first thing I noticed when I started looking into it is that it is VR. So what made you decide to, make VR like one of the key things with this game?
Yeah. What prompted me to make something much more challenging that's likely to make less money, right? That's kind of the crazy part about it. Fortunately, it seems like the market for that with the Quest 2 and stuff is starting to pick up. But I've always been fascinated with modern technology. I actually didn't. I'm not trained as a game developer. I'm trained in film studies and philosophy, and I didn't actually expect to be making games. But I always sort of had this like interest in science or new technology. I was always interested in it. And my very first foray into games was an augmented reality game. And so I've just always been I've never really been set up to be like we're going to make conventional games. Though sometimes I wonder why I don't, because trying to always be working with these cutting edge technologies can be very challenging. But essentially for this game, we sort of didn't want you to feel like taking that Mass Effect, which is one of the influences for the game. You know, in Mass Effect, you sort of, when you play Renegade, for instance, you don't feel like you are the Renegade. You feel like I'm playing a character who I'm making Renegade. And I
Hmm.
felt that VR was a very good platform to say, we are going to put you in a world where, you know, as if everything is going wrong, except for the pandemic, but the environment, government security, spy, all that's like the government surveillance, capitalism, things like that. All those things are way, way worse. It's like we don't do anything about it. The world kind of collapses, and those are sort of still there. What is that world? And what are the decisions you have to make in a world where there isn't really good options? And what will you make? And we wanted it so that you felt a direct connection to your decisions by basically making you your origin is very, very simple as a character in the game. It's you used to be a programmer, you worked in an automation company, and you ended up, unbeknownst to you, sort of automating your own job. And then you got laid off, and you had to figure out kind of what to do when there's not many jobs left. And in that role, that's the only thing we sort of define about the character. You meet all kinds of characters. You meet terrorists and refugees. You meet people who run basically like Uber, which is like we have Fuber in the game. You meet like Elon Musk type characters, and they all create these philosophical or moralistic problems to do with things like automation, income inequality, all those things. And it's the game doesn't judge the answers; it just sort of presents the problems and lets you navigate it. And we
Hmm.
wanted that to be as intimate as possible, and we wanted the characters also to feel not just like by being in VR and them sort of having a presence in the same space as you, we sort of are hoping that that creates a more of a connection with the characters so that you're not likely to like Grand Theft Auto just always be the most malicious, for fun. Just don't mow down. You don't have a machine gun, but you know what I'm saying? Like in Grand Theft Auto, you just sort of like, sometimes you're just like, I'm just going to go around and murder a bunch of people for the next half hour and create havoc, which is a lot of fun, but sort of it undermines the idea that you're really making decisions in a decision-based game. So that's kind of why we chose VR. And then I also just hope that that made you feel more rooted in the world, that we could really transport you into um, the world of the game. Basically, it's got a pretty elaborate canon, and we feel that that will help. But it's primarily about that the story is you in this scenario, and you're not anybody specifically other than you.
Okay. And, since it is VR, and you said that one of the inspirations for it was Job Simulator, is it like during like a typical session of play, is it going to be like Job Simulator where you're just like doing one task and you have to move to like another console and do something else? Are you going to be like constantly juggling things during a part of a playthrough?
Yes, so it's a lot about juggling. The balance point compared to Job Simulator is a little bit different because this one is all you pick up a passenger and you're on a route, and the focus is to maximize the tips. Or failing that, you can report criminals to the government for a lot of money, and what the government considers criminals, you might not agree with. So there is like that's sort of the core gameplay is the conversations, but sprinkled in that there is sort of like distraction style mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
like for instance, like, if you fly under an oil rig, you might get splattered oil all over your thing, and you have to quickly use your wipers to clear it. There is like toll booths, which will charge you unless you use your laser beam. There's, you have an energy level system, and you sort of drink coffee to get like a power up, and that lets you like have infinite power temporarily and clears like sleep effects that happen to you. Um, But essentially, like there's a series of things you can hit other cars. Like cars are too slow, and if you don't hit the horn, you'll hit the cars. So there's sort of all these things in the environment that can happen to you that it's optimum. The optimum playstyle would be to try to avoid all of those, but you mostly have to pay attention to the passenger. So it has a job simulator type thing, but it's sort of like the job simulator's focus is on those mechanics. And playing around and sort of having more of a sandboxy kind of feel with those mechanics, where our focus is on the conversations, but those things facilitate elements that you can, like if you want to make the most money, you use those mechanics. If you want to get the highest tips, there's AC units and radios and things like that that you tune to try to maximize your tips. So it's all sort of synergized in that system of listening to the passenger and trying to get through. In terms of how it's like balanced, like technically you could probably not, like you would do worse financially for not paying attention, but like you can progress in the story even if you're playing relatively badly. But the optimum gameplay, the most points, the most unlocks, the most abilities to do things come from dealing with those challenges efficiently. One of the cool things, actually, this is a mechanic I actually really like, is like there's a shield generator, and the shield generator, almost like you hold your hand over this shield emitter, and it fills your hand like a Pokeball, and anywhere you chuck it is where the shield emits from, and that gives you like temporary protection. So it has that sort of physicality of Job Simulator, and it has some of the wackiness, but it's not quite as wacky as Job Simulator. But essentially that's sort of where those two things meet.
Okay. And while working on those types of mechanics for the game, was there any difficulty you encountered in like trying to get like a particular motion or like in the game itself, like a button press using like the VR controls? Because
it's all been a nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been very, very hard. There's a couple things, and I have a tendency to do this. So like with my first game, it was a location-based AR game before Pokemon Go. And I have this tendency of like biting off more than I can chew. And with this game, I don't know that I bit off more than I can chew, but I because there's quite a lot of scope in the game, quite a lot of mechanics and everything. But I have a tendency of being like just head on running into whatever the hardest problems are. So there's basically two pieces that are extremely challenging. There is, yes, all of those tactile mechanics, making every lever feel great and having it be like the mechanic is easily and intuitively understood is very difficult. Like making sure your hands, with Job Simulator, they blink your hands out. One thing that we decided to do, which has kind of been very challenging, is you can always see your hand kind of like in Half-Life, because your energy, you actually power parts of the taxi with your own blood in a way. Like it gets transformed through technology, but essentially like it drains the life out of you by being a taxi driver is kind of the idea. So your hands are always visible. And so everything you interact with, your hand has to be visible. So, the tractor beam is kind of like a fishing mechanic. You see like almost like an Amazon cargo drone. You try to reel it off and break it, and making all that feel good and not feel janky, or like making sure the grips are correct was very hard, along with just designing. Like you almost felt like a product designer. The amount of times we had to redo the entire console, well, not redo, but like continue to refine it. It's because it's like the physicality of it, how you feel when you sit, the size of the buttons, all that stuff is super important to like make it clear to the player what's going on, make it easy to use. You're surrounded by buttons, but you don't want button conflicts, right? Like you don't want like, oh, I'm trying to hit the wiper and this happens. So you're trying to pack as many controls in as possible without having it be so close or cluttered that it's like our very first design was trying to be like the Millennium Falcon with tons of switches, but it's just not doable. Like you'll just flip things that you don't want to do. So that was really hard. But then on top of it all, we're also facing like the motion sickness problem head on. We are I can't say, oh, nobody will get sick playing this game, but we are trying to that's our hope. And we're trying very, very hard to do that. So you're a flying taxi in this context of like, we're trying to make so that nobody gets sick playing the game. And then there's an additional problem where those two things meet. Because a lot of these physics-based controls that Job Simulator uses, if you notice, the environments are static, right? So what ended up happening when we developed our game is because the taxi was moving, it would actually, the physics of the movement would screw up all the controls, and you'd lift up a control and it'd fly out the window, and we had to do a lot of stuff to like make the behavior of them be what it feels like it should be and not what it really would be in a physics environment, because you're whipping by at like 300 miles an hour. technically in real life, the force of doing something at those speeds might be tougher, or at least that's how the game treats it. So we face those two systems, which are two huge VR challenges and problems, and then they also interact in a way that made it even more difficult. Um, I think we're in a pretty good place. Like we're kind of in that last mile. Like the story's written, all the mechanics are locked in, the level design is all locked in, and we're in that sort of polish phase where it's sort of that's what makes or breaks the how great the game will be. So it's like we'll see, but yes, it was very very challenging to do those mechanics. And the original Last Taxi, the very first demo which we actually put up on Greenlight was not VR. And
Oh,
I do some days go and be like, that would have been done so much faster, and it still would have been great. Maybe it would have been why did I decide to do this kind of thing. But I do really love the technology, and I feel like as an indie dev, it's harder to make VR games, but at least still today there is not that crowded of a market. Like there is starting to be that infill, but like mobile or PC, there's so many people you're competing with that part of the strategy is like, yeah, it's going to be costlier to make, it's going to be harder to make, but maybe you can become a top tier game within that field easier than releasing like a traditional, just straight up PC game.
okay. And so, like, where did the idea for the last taxi come from? Was there any like one specific source, or is it more like just a whole bunch of ideas that kind of just melded together until you're like, oh, let's make this game like this?
Yeah, it's hard to remember the specifics, but there's definitely like we were getting to the end of our first game and we were like, what do we do now? And there was like a very intentional like searching for the next idea kind of game where there was a lot of collaboration from the whole team. I think ultimately D came up with the taxi idea. And then I was the one who set it in like the automated future and did a lot of the world building elements on top of that to make it sort of like this sort of grander, um, more operatic game. But essentially, it came the biggest thing that came out of it is we had huge ideas in terms of narrative because we're primarily a narrative company. Like I published stories. I made films. Like that's kind of my background. I'm about storytelling. And our first
Mm-hmm.
game, there I wanted to tell this grand story, but we got so like crushed by being sort of not mature devs yet, and by trying to work with AR before there's AR kit, and like even the company we were using got bought by Apple during the process, and they took the dev tools. Like the game just kind of got crunched down to yeah, we had this grand vision and got crunched down to this sort of like almost like less than 1% of the story I wanted to tell is in that first game. So part of the mandate of the second game was we got to have a lot of stories, make up for lost time, put a lot of ideas in the game, and having that idea of each customer you pick up has their own story that you can navigate allows us to explore a lot of different ideas. There is an overarching plot line, and some characters are aligned with that, and some characters are just random passengers. But they all have a unique story that has a different sort of viewpoint in relation to different issues in the game world. Um, and so that was like the most important thing to us is like what's something that we can do like that. And then you look at sort of like a world like Futurama, and it's like we also didn't want to make this like a too grim. Like the game is grim. There's like grim, thematically grim stuff that can happen in this game. But we didn't want it to seem like not accessible by being so bleak. And literally, it's like D is like more the fun, irreverent, humorous, and I'm more the like dark. And to try to balance that out, we sort of went for an approach of like an art style that was inspired by Futurama or cartoons like that, where Futurama deals with some pretty crazy stuff, pretty crazy ideas, but it's accessible because it sort of has a cartoon veneer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was part of that as well.
Okay. So yeah, when the game is, all set and ready to go, like what do you intend to release it on other than like currently being available for wish listing on Steam?
Sure. So all major like VR platforms, including like putting it on Itch, putting it on Epic Game Store, Oculus Store, that's sort of the first wave of the game. Based on how it goes there, we would basically try to do two things. Get it onto. It's really kind of, as a VR dev, a little bit uncertain in terms of consoles because you don't. Neither of them seem to be necessarily supporting it. And there's even just an article from like the Sony, I think CEO of Sony, that was like, we're not sure about this VR thing. It's got potential. It'll be great someday, but it's not there yet. So it's like, are they going to support it for the PlayStation 5? I don't know. But there is plans if the market is there to actually ship it to any kind of console that supports VR and even have a non-VR version of the game at some point, and then ultimately hit like Oculus Quest natively. But the game world is very, very big, so I'm not sure if we can hit the Quest. Like the actual map that you explore is larger than GTA 5 that you can fly through in terms of like you go higher than Mount Everest and you fly farther and across greater distances than GTA, and it's kind of like very open sometimes. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if graphically we could ever get to work on a Quest, but that would be a long-term goal.
Okay. And and with that we move on to the final question on the interview, which everyone always understands perfectly. So, Corey, in your opinion, is video games?
Is video games? Hmm. Yes.
And there you have it. And with that, we can bring this particular episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast to a close. I would like to thank Corey King of ZenFri Games for joining me and talking about this upcoming game he has got a working on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Follow us on Twitter at The Last Taxi, or wishlist us on Steam. That's the best thing, just The Last Taxi. And thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And if any of you listening, or watching at home enjoyed what you heard, like and subscribe and all that, so that one day I can have more than double digits of subscriber. And yeah, if for some reason, and if you have a spare dollar, you go to patreon.com/the Pumpkin Copter Cast, where for as little as $1 a month you can submit questions for me to use in future interviews. And yeah, that this has been the Pumpkin Copter Cast, and as I always say at the end of every show, have a gourd day, everyone.